It seems to be a growing trend here in the NFL this season for fantasy football owners. It's Sunday afternoon. You walk into the living room, grab your cell phone to take a look at your fantasy football team, see how it's doing. What the fuck? Hey, what's going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners. Kyle coming to you from the Draft.com studios, and hopefully you had a good week 4. Now, there's probably a lot of you out there that did exactly what I did in the intro to this video. So many superstars had a bad week this week. We had some big weeks from some guys, but we also had some awful weeks. Guys like DeAndre Hopkins, where have they gone to? It's been tough to watch. But that's okay. We need to get ready and move forward for week 5. So we're going to talk about some waiver wire pickups that you can grab to get through some of the bye weeks that we have coming up. We've already started the bye weeks. We're going to have a few more teams as we go through hitting those byes. So we need to be able to cover our teams. Now, I've heard you in the comments loud and clear. You want to see a few more players that are lesser owned. Now, to be included in this video, you got to be under 50%. However, I got a few guys that are going to be down towards those single digits, lesser owned players that you can take a shot at that could produce decent fantasy weeks for you. Also, do not want to forget either. We dropped a video late last week about hitting 70,000 subscribers. And we're giving away $1,000 in cold hard cash to one of our members of Headliner Nation. So make sure that you go back and check out our video about that. I'll make sure that we put a link in the bottom in the description. So when you get done with this video, you can scroll down and find out how you can win $1,000. And I'm just going to be straightforward with you. All you got to do is comment on a video. That's it. And you're entered for a chance to win. Now, without further ado, let's jump into it. Players that we want to target on the waiver wire before week 5. All right, the first one is Mitchell Trubisky's backup, Chase Daniel, who's now going to be the starter for the Chicago Bears for an unspecified amount of time. We still haven't heard exactly what's going on with Mitchell Trubisky. A shoulder injury ended up coming out of the game yesterday. 0% owned for Chase Daniel. So he's a guy that if you are in a deeper league, a super flex, a 2QB type league, Chase Daniel is a guy that you're going to have to run out and get your hands on rather quickly, especially if you are a Mitchell Trubisky owner. And if you're in those type of formats, 2QB, super flex, I would even take a shot on him, even if you already have enough quarterbacks, and block somebody from getting him, especially that Mitchell Trubisky owner. So take a shot at that, and we'll see what happens with Chase Daniel. He didn't do too bad after coming into the game to relieve Trubisky. 22 of 30 for 195 yards and threw a touchdown. So we'll see what ends up happening. Allen Robinson still looked pretty good. Does Anthony Miller become a thing again? What's going to happen? Who's going to be the guy that he takes a look at? We'll see what happens moving forward. But again, somebody that you want to keep an eye on. In one quarterback leagues, though, I would skip on Chase Daniel and take a look at one of the guys that we're going to talk about next. After week 2 of the NFL season, you were very vocal about what you felt for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We didn't like Jameis Winston. You wanted to get rid of Mike Evans. Chris Godwin was the only ownable fantasy asset for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. However, I told you at that time, let's hold out a little bit longer. Let's wait and see what happens with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And lo and behold, they come out against the Los Angeles Rams and even surprised me with a huge performance this past weekend. So, after that slow start, they've started to pick up speed, and even Jameis Winston has looked better. So, after a rough start to the year, weeks 1 and 2, since then in weeks 3 and 4, Jameis Winston is 51 of 78 for 765 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Yes, they had an easy matchup a couple of weeks ago against the New York Giants. However, this matchup against the Los Angeles Rams was supposed to be much more difficult, and they ended up coming through and looking really well. So Jameis Winston is a guy that I've got back on my radar, just coming in under that 50% owned. And one quarterback leagues, I'm definitely going to add him, especially if I've had any injuries. If you've been streaming quarterbacks, I'm definitely going to add him. Definitely take a shot at Jameis Winston now moving forward. If you don't already own him, a lot of people have probably dropped him to the waiver wire. The legend that is Gardner Minshew continues to grow. And Headliner Nation, this will be the last time it happens. I've had him as a sit every week so far. It's not going to happen moving forward. There's no way. He's been playing way too well. In 4 games so far this season, remember in week 1 is when he came in for Nick Foles after he got hurt. He's only thrown 1 interception. So he's looked really good. Now he's not put up a ton of volume. He has at least 200 yards in every single game. And over the next 2 weeks, he gets the Carolina Panthers and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we'll see. These matchups might be a little bit more difficult than what he's faced so far, but he's been very good. Not only that, but a couple of times this season, he's offered you a little bit extra on the ground with his legs as well. So he's definitely a guy in 2 QB Superflex leagues that you need to have on your roster. And even in 1 quarterback leagues, if you're looking to stream somebody, he's definitely a guy that you're going to be taking a look at first. Only 13% owned, so he's going to be available in a majority of your leagues. And like I said, I will not be sitting him again moving forward. Last but not least, my boy from Detroit, Matthew Stafford. I've been a Stafford truther through thick and thin. I've stuck next to him. He's a great quarterback, okay? He just he gets a bad rap because he's, for the better part of his career, have had a crappy team around him. But even the Lions are surprising me this year. I thought it was going to be a really rough year for them, and they literally took the Kansas City Chiefs down to the wire. Now, the defense played really well, but Stafford played really well. Honestly, this game this past weekend was probably one of Stafford's best games as a Detroit Lion. So what will we see moving forward? Well, more than enough to get me to buy in. Matthew Stafford so far this year, 88 of 141, 1,122 yards, 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a 102.6 passer rating. So he's looking good. He's looked very, very good so far. He was the quarterback 14 coming into this week. You better believe that he's going to be a little bit higher than that. He might end up even being a quarterback 1 heading into next week's bye. Now, I know he had the hip issue. He was questionable later in the week, and a lot of people thought he might not play. He still ended up going out there. He gets a week to rest now. Probably won't see a ton of practice from him over the next couple of weeks. They'll get him ready to go. They've got a matchup at Green Bay in week 6. That will be a fun one to watch against Aaron Rodgers and a pretty decent defense. However, Carson Wentz went into Green Bay and also played a lot better than I anticipated. Maybe Matthew Stafford will do the same thing in a couple of weeks. Darryl Williams got another chance this week with Damian Williams being out once again, but he had to split a little bit more touches with a healthier LaShawn McCoy. Now, what are we going to see from him moving forward? It's all going to depend on Damian Williams. Darryl Williams hasn't been that bad. Now, he is 35% owned in fantasy football leagues. So am I going to run out to add him off the waiver wire? I'm definitely not going to use a top priority on him. However, if I have a lower priority, I would be willing to grab him now and put him on my roster and just hold and wait and see what happens with Damian Williams. This past weekend against Detroit, he did have 56 yards on 11 touches, so he's been decently efficient so far this year. But again, he's going to be splitting time with LaShawn McCoy if LaShawn McCoy is healthy, which he looked good this past week. And as soon as Damian Williams comes back, then he's really going to lose out on more touches. So not a guy that I really want to own. But again, with a lot of bye weeks coming up, especially like Detroit coming up this past week, if you're a Kerryon Johnson owner and need somebody, Darryl Williams could be a guy that you could at least grab and hold for right now. And then if Damian Williams ends up missing another week, then you could throw Darryl Williams into your flex for one more week. The waiver wire for running backs this week is probably going to be really thin. But I want to talk about Jordan Wilkins and Nyheim Hines for just a second here because Marlon Mack ended up going down with an injury. He went off the field at one point with an ankle injury, ended up leaving the field later on and not coming back. So what are we going to see moving forward? I think Jordan Wilkins is a speculative add right now. Now, I would much rather have Nyheim Hines. We'll talk about him in a minute. But Wilkins is a guy that if you're definitely a Marlon Mack owner, you should be investing in him. But if you're in a deeper league, take a look at him as well. He 4 of 17 this past week, so not great. But 2 weeks ago, probably highly unnoticed by a lot of fantasy owners, 5 rushes for 82 yards. At times, Wilkins looked good last year when Mack was dealing with some injuries, when Wilkins had to fill in. Even in times when he would just make it onto the field, he looked pretty good. He can be a little inconsistent as a runner, but with that being said, if Marlon Mack ends up being hurt and needs to miss some time, Jordan Wilkins at that point brings up a lot of value because Nyheim Hines isn't going to have nearly as many rushing attempts, even if I think Nyheim Hines sees the field a little bit more than Jordan Wilkins. So let's talk about Hines at this point now. 38% owned to Wilkins 0.8% owned. With Nyheim Hines, 6 receptions, for 39 yards. Now, the reason that Nyheim Hines might be a little bit more of an ad for me at this point over Wilkins is because what if T.Y. Hilton also has issues moving forward and is unable to get healthy, let's say next week? Again, Hilton and possibly Mack can't get healthy, end up missing next week. Now Nyheim Hines has a ton of value as a runner and as a pass catcher. He's a guy that can end up seeing a lot of snaps. So if you're in a PPR league, PPR, even half PPR, that's where we're going to target Nyheim Hines first. He is a guy that even if Mack plays next week, Hines could be a guy that you pick up and put in your lineup right away. Jordan Wilkins, Mack would have to miss time. So we need to decide right now, do you have enough roster space to grab him, add him, and stash him in case Mack doesn't play next week? Jordan Wilkins is going to be like a standard guy for me in a half PPR. If Mack misses, then I would think about playing him if I really have no other options. But do keep in mind, they get Kansas City next week. Kansas City got lit up by Kerryon Johnson this past week. So either of these guys, either Wilkins or Hines, could end up having decent fantasy football weeks for you next week against Kansas City. All right, so for this one, we're going to head to the dark abyss of the waiver wires. 0.1% owned J.D. McKissack from the Detroit Lions is probably not a guy that you're going to spend any type of waiver claim on this week. First off, number one, they're on a bye next week, so no one's going to be running to the waiver wire to pick up J.D. McKissack. But like I mentioned, the running back waiver wire is going to be very thin this week. However, with J.D. McKissack, I'm just plugging it in your mind just a little bit moving forward. Just remember the name, because even though he only had 5 touches for 41 yards, not bad, great. He still looked really good on a couple of those touches. He looked really slick, really agile. He was moving in and out, got away from a couple of defenders. He's a guy that if Kerryon Johnson were to be injured for any reason, is going to pick up a lot of value really quick. Everybody was all over Ty Johnson at one point. J.D. McKissack is a guy that I really want to keep an eye on as well. Again, this is very deep leagues. You're not considering him this week anyway. However, I just wanted to throw it in there in the back of your mind. So moving forward, you could remember that name if you're really hurting for someone, or if we find out Kerryon Johnson is going to be limited anyway, or for future performances of the Lions, just say, hey, you know what? We should get him on the field more often, because if that happens, then he might be seriously considered as a waiver wire addition. All right, here we go. We have a lot of really good options on the waiver wire for wide receiver this week, so buckle up, listen close. We've got a few guys to talk about. Geronimo Allison being number one, 27% owned. Last week, Marquez Valdes-Scantling was at the top of my list for wide receivers to pick up. He was just under 50% owned. He has now climbed over that. But with the Devontae Adams injury, how long is he going to end up missing? My guy in that offense, my wide receiver, is still going to be MVS. However, if MVS draws the top option for the defense, then Geronimo Allison at that point becomes a must-own in every single format while Adams is out. 3 for 52 and a touchdown this past week against Philadelphia. And again, I mentioned it, MVS, if he's the main guy, if he draws that number one coverage, Allison working out of the slot, he could get peppered with a lot of targets really quick. A really good PPR ad moving forward. They get Dallas next week, a game that could be high scoring, even though the Saints and Dallas were supposed to be high scoring this past week, and it didn't end up happening. Keep an eye on him this week. He's definitely a guy I'm considering with a high to mid waiver wire addition. Hey, I do love myself some Cole Beasley. And when he signed with the Buffalo Bills, I didn't love it because I didn't know if Josh Allen was going to be accurate enough, especially in the intermediate passing game, to make him fantasy viable. However, at 20.3% owned right now, Cole Beasley is definitely a guy that I am taking a flyer on this coming week. Now, he has had double-digit targets each of the last 2 games. He has at least 40 yards receiving in every single game, and he went 7 of 75 this past week, including leading the team with 12 targets. So, again, in PPR leagues and half PPR leagues, I really love to stash on my bench those slot receivers that get peppered with a bunch of targets, that volume that I could potentially insert into my lineup in any given week. They get Tennessee this coming week, which will be nice to see from them. So we're gonna get Cole Beasley out there this week. I definitely think he's a guy that you could stream, especially with like Galladay being gone this week, Marvin Jones being gone this week. I could talk about the Miami Dolphins, who are on a bye, but that doesn't really matter. But Cole Beasley is definitely a guy that could fill in PPR leagues for you this week, so keep an eye on him and add him to your team if possible. All right, next up at 35.5% owned, Mohamed Sanu, the real wide receiver too, in Atlanta. Okay, maybe we're going too far, but Mohamed Sanu has always been a guy that I have loved to own on my teams. Just a late round flyer on a guy that can have some really good wide receiver 2 weeks, but it always has the eye of Matt Ryan. Since he's come to the Atlanta Falcons, I feel like he's been a really underrated fantasy asset because he's been a guy that you can plug and play, and he's not going to disappoint you in most weeks. He's going to get you some numbers. It's not going to be outstanding unless he throws a touchdown because he's an excellent passer. But anyway, gets you a few points, and with that being said, you can plug and play him at any time. Moving forward, though, do we need to consider him more? He has at least 50 yards receiving in 3 or 4 games this year. Is he the wide receiver 2 over Ridley right now? I don't know. We'll see. He definitely has more potential for volume than Ridley does. Ridley's going to be my touchdown guy, my standard league guy, my red zone guy. But Mohamed Sanu is a guy that could really add up some volume for you really quickly. 12 targets this past week, the most on the team. Really like Mohamed Sanu moving forward. Definitely a guy that you could plug in as a wide receiver 3 or even a flex play, and he's not going to let you down. He's not going to put up a 0. He's going to get you some points, and then your studs can help carry your team to victory. All right, one of my deeper players to take a look at this week, Willie Sneed, only 2% owned. Marquise Brown has been the guy. Marquise Brown, right? Mark Andrews, those have been the 2 main guys that we've talked about in Baltimore. But don't sleep on Willie Sneed. He was definitely a guy that was a deep sleeper for me before the season started. He hasn't really done a ton, but maybe he's done just enough. So he's got 3 games with at least 40 yards this year, and he's got games against Pittsburgh and Cincinnati coming up over the next couple of weeks. He was 2 for 61 and a touchdown this past week, but that's why I would take a look at him this week. You might be able to get him for a really low waiver priority, or you might just let waivers clear and get him as a free agent. Now, if you're in a deeper league, you're definitely going to probably have to use a waiver priority on him. But those Pittsburgh and Cincinnati matchups that he has coming up could be huge weeks for him. Not wide receiver 1 type weeks, and probably not even wide receiver 2 type weeks, but really solid wide receiver 3 and flex play weeks. A guy that could potentially end up getting you a touchdown, but that could see a ton of targets and really make the most of his opportunities over the next 2 weeks. My first tight end is just going to be my weekly reminder that Chris Herndon is coming off suspension for next week. So at only 8% owned, he's definitely a guy that I would look at grabbing. Might not offer you starter numbers right away, but I definitely think he's a guy that you should be adding because he could become a very valuable tight end asset coming up soon. Whether it be injuries or streaming, it doesn't matter. If you need a tight end, Chris Herndon is definitely a guy that I would be adding this week. Dawson Knox, 3% owned, but over the last 2 weeks, he has 125 yards receiving. So is he becoming a trusted target for Josh Allen? Maybe he is. We'll want to keep an eye on that because Dawson Knox really could end up being a guy that maybe is not a viable play every single week, but becomes a really nice streaming play, a guy that could put up some big games. Maybe not a ton of targets, maybe not finding the end zone every single week, but if you're in deeper leagues, if you have a deeper bench and you can afford to hold 2 tight ends, Dawson Knox would be a guy that I grab, pick up, put in on my bench, and then when we have some buys coming up, you could put him in, and hopefully if it's a favorable matchup, he helps you out during that week. If you've been following us here on the Fantasy Headliners, or if you bought our draft guide, you know that one of my major sleepers this year was Darren Waller. So far, that's turned out pretty good, I would say. Last year, Ricky Seals-Jones was that guy. That didn't end up working out. Out of Arizona now and in Cleveland, he's still a guy that I really, really like. A former wide receiver at Texas A&M, an athlete, a guy that can catch the football and can make plays after the catch. So this week when I saw that he went 3 for 82 and a touchdown, just to let you know how I felt, I'm going to use this prop. This is a lightsaber that you would find at a store. I'm just going to give you an idea of how excited I was to see Ricky Seals-Jones' performance this past week. That's all you need to know. Okay? Ricky Seals-Jones, Absolutely love this guy. I had him as a sit this past week, but if he's a guy that can get going in that offense, he's definitely going to be another weapon for Baker Mayfield while David Njoku is out. I don't expect him to be any type of a high volume play any given week, but any week that you were to stick him in your lineup, I think he has the option to have a good week for you. So keep an eye on him. Again, only 0.1% owned, and probably no one's going to go run to add him this week because a lot of people will probably say, lucky week. However, keep an eye on him because, again, he could have some more big weeks this season for the Cleveland Browns. All right, another deep option for you from the Detroit Lions, Logan Thomas, a converted quarterback, now playing tight end for the Detroit Lions. TJ Hawkinson went down on a really scary fall, okay? Ended up falling on the side of his head. You could tell he was knocked out instantly, ended up going off the field and was evaluated for a concussion. Now, after that happened, Logan Thomas did see 3 targets, 3 catches, and 25 yards. And nothing to write home about, right? However, Jesse James isn't really a receiving tight end. Now, TJ Hawkinson, who can also receive the ball, hasn't really done a whole lot this year outside of weeks 1 and 4 before he got hurt this past week. So I'm not expecting anything big from Logan Thomas. But again, a deep sleeper that I'd like you to keep your eye on because there is a possibility moving forward that he could have a little bit of a streaming viable potential for you if you need any help during a bye week. All right, Headliner Nation, there you have it. Week 5 waiver wire targets. One more name that I didn't throw out with wide receivers was A.J. Brown. Not really interested in picking him up right now. He's got really tough matchups coming up, and he's been boom or bust so far this season. But at only 6% owned, he's definitely got to be keeping an eye on. So a few deep dives in this episode, a few other names as well that are a little bit more highly owned but can really help in the coming weeks as buys pop up. So whatever it may be for your team, make sure you spend a little bit of fab or use a waiver priority this week. Strengthen your team. Get ready to roll. We're going to be jumping into the middle of the fantasy season here very soon. This is where we need to make a run to the playoffs. So get ready to start rolling right now. Ladies and gentlemen, if you loved the episode or if you liked the episode or if you thought it was mediocre and I did a decent job and you're just going to give me a thumbs up because you feel bad for me, whatever it may be, hit the thumbs up button if you appreciated the content. Also, if you're new to Headliner Nation and you haven't subscribed yet, consider hitting that subscribe button down below and also hit the notification bell. So anytime we go live with an awesome live show like we do every Saturday night, or we drop new content, which is basically every single day of the week, you're notified and you can check it out right away. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Fantasy Headliners, and I'll see you on the next one. Have a good one.